Hi, 10th graders, and welcome back. Today we're going to read 779 to 780, the Cold War around the world to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And we have some very special guests to help explain today's main topic, which is the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'd like you to meet Nikita Khrushchev, leader of Russia during the Cold War, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Hi. And JFK, who borrowed Marilyn Monroe's blonde wig. Hi, I'm the United States during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And of course, last but not least, Fidel Castro, leader of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Hello to all. Okay, well, this should be quite a bit of fun for all of us, I think. Okay, the Cold War around the world. The superpowers waged the Cold War not only in Europe, but also around the world. By the end of World War II, the Soviets were helping communist forces in China, Korea, and elsewhere. The United States took action to respond to the global threat of communism. Remember that our main foreign policy during this time was containment, and that containment is our goal of stopping the spread of communism. Establishing alliances and bases. To stop the spread of communism, the United States sought regional alliances with friendly powers. In Europe, it backed NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. In Asia, the United States promoted another regional alliance, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, SEATO. It included the United States, Britain, France, Australia, Pakistan, Thailand, New Zealand, and the Philippines. The United States also formed military alliances with individual nations such as Japan and South Korea. Often, these agreements included the right to set up American military bases. As a result, American bases circled the globe from North America to Europe, Asia, and the islands of the Pacific. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union formed its own alliances. In addition to the Warsaw Pact in Europe, the Soviet Union formed alliances with newly independent nations in Africa and Asia. However, the Soviet Union had few bases overseas, where the Cold War got hot. Because both superpowers had a global reach, local conflicts in many places played into the Cold War. Often the United States and its allies supported one side and the Soviet bloc supported the other. Through such struggles, the superpowers could confront each other indirectly rather than head-to-head. Political shifts around the world added to Cold War tensions. When communist forces won control of mainland China in 1949, the United States feared that a tide of communism would sweep around the world. During this period, European colonies in Africa and Asia battled for independence. Liberation leaders and guerrillas frequently sought help from one or the other Cold War power. Let's remember that guerrilla is a type of military tactic where small bands of soldiers attack quickly using the environment around them, withdraw quickly. It's kind of like a sting thing. So they attack quickly. It was very effective. On occasion, the Cold War erupted into shooting wars, especially in Asia. Both Korea and Vietnam were torn by brutal conflicts in which the United States, the Soviet Union, and China played crucial roles. More commonly, however, the superpowers provided weapons, training, or other aids to opposing forces in Asia, Africa, or Latin America. The United States and Latin America. Let's remember that Latin America is a cultural designation because of the Spanish and Portuguese languages. So it's basically the area that is south of the United States, where Spanish and Portuguese were the languages that were brought over via cultural diffusion. The United States and Latin America. The United States was especially concerned about the threat of communism in the Western Hemisphere. Seeing reform movements in Latin American countries as communist threats, it backed right-wing, anti-communist dictators and helped topple elected socialist leaders. So let's take a short break. Why would we do that? Why would we support dictators and try to overturn valid elections? Because our foreign policy during this time was containment. So, it's easy to look back and say maybe that was wrong, maybe it was right. I don't know, but it was all about containment. In 1962, Cuba, a small island nation just 90 miles from Florida, became the chief focus of United States concern. Cuba. The Communist Revolution in Cuba. In the 1950s, a young lawyer, Fidel Castro, it is I, Fidel Castro, organized an armed rebellion against the corrupt dictator who then ruled Cuba. His name was Batista. By 1959, Castro had led his tiny guerrilla army to victory and set about transforming the country into a communist state. We'll read more about me. Okay, Fidel. During the Cuban Revolution, Castro nationalized or took over foreign-owned businesses. So let's take a break. What is that? What did you do, Fidel? Well, there were sugar and tobacco plantations on Cuba owned by foreigners. Who were the foreigners? Americans, for example. And what did you do with the ownership of them? I took control of them. Oh, okay. He put most land under government control and distributed the land to peasant farmers. Well, that got the support of the peasants because remember, peasants, what do they want? They want land. So when you promise them or give them land, it often gives you their support. While Castro imposed harsh authoritarian rule, he did at first improve conditions for the poor. But Castro's revolution angered many Cubans, especially from the middle class. Critics were jailed or silenced. Hundreds of thousands of Cubans fled to the United States, because remember, it's only 90 miles away. The United States, alarmed as Castro turned to the Soviet Union for support, attempted to bring down the communist regime next door. President JFK backed a plan by anti-Castro exiles to invade Cuba and lead an uprising against Castro. I am going to take you out. Not on a date. I'm going to get rid of you. The poorly planned plot was a disaster. An invasion force landed at the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, but was quickly crushed. I won. The news of the plot helped Castro rally Cuban popular opinion against foreign interference, and the bungled invasion hurt the reputation of the United States. Excuse me, I'll be right back. I'm just going to go figure out a new plan. The Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1962, the United States imposed a trade embargo on Cuba. Well, what does a trade embargo look like? It looks like you don't trade with Cuba, and you don't want your allies to do so either. Castro, seeking closer ties with the Soviet Union. Hi, Soviet Union here. Nikita Khrushchev. Let the Soviets build nuclear bases in Cuba. The threat of Soviet nuclear bases in its backyard outraged the United States and touched off a dangerous crisis. So here are our three main players in the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States under JFK, the Soviet Union with Nikita Khrushchev, and Cuba with Fidel Castro. Okay. In October 1962, President Kennedy imposed a naval blockade in Cuba. So what would a naval blockade be? Well, a naval blockade would be this. Basically, the American Navy, one second. The American Navy, blocked off Cuba so that nobody could get there. See? Nope, can't get through the American Navy. That might look like a Captain America pillow, and that's because it is a Captain America pillow representing the U.S. Navy. Okay, back to this. Kennedy demanded the Soviet Union remove its nuclear missiles from Cuba. Hey, you got to get those nukes out of there. And for a few tense days, the world faced the risk of nuclear war. Finally, however, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, that's me, backed down. He agreed to remove the Soviet missiles, but won a secret pledge from Kennedy not to invade Cuba. Now, not in the book, but in some of the worksheets that I would normally give if we were in school, it talks about the fact that Kennedy and Khrushchev, so let's talk Kennedy and Khrushchev here, met in secret. Hi, psst, let's have some talks. Okay, what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about your missiles in Turkey. What? Yes, we had missiles in Turkey, which was, kind of close to the Soviet Union, if you look it up. And by kind of close, I mean a lot close. And we agreed, okay, I'll take my missiles out. You take your missiles out, okay? And I'll end the blockade. and I'll not invade you anymore, and I will still keep an embargo on you. I'm not trading with you. But what about, I'm not trading with Cuba, I mean. And the end. Okay, I'll take out my missiles. I'll take out my missiles. And even though it was 13 days, I think, in October that were close to nuclear war, it did not happen.